Joining me today in Capital TV show, David Otaway. He's Middle East fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Mr. Otaway, hello, good evening.
Hello.
I want to start asking about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. There has been much talk about the possibility of relocating American forces, perhaps in Central Asia, or the Gulf region. What are the most prominent scenarios in this case?
I think the most prominent scenario is that the troops, at least some of the troops withdrawing from Afghanistan, will end up in some of the American bases in the Gulf, because it is the closest, most feasible option. Trying to operate out of any of the so-called stands to the north of Afghanistan strikes me that the Russians will not allow that, and that the most likely alternative will be the Gulf. And I heard the CENTCOM commander, General McKenzie, he didn't talk about this, but he clearly indicated that one option was to increase, to fall back on the Persian Gulf bases the Americans have there already.
Yeah.
So I suspect that is very likely to happen.
You think that UAE will be the most place available or suitable for this?
Well, no, our main operating base there is Qatar, aid base. Maybe some of the planes might fly out of United Arab Emirates, yeah. But I think probably the main center of operation would be what it is now, which is Al Udeid base in Qatar.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin talked about future wars, cyber wars, and he didn't mention Russia and China, but it seems like there is a new war coming up on United States. So do you have any idea about what will be the strategy for Biden administration to prevent any war or to defend itself against any war coming up in cyber attack?
Well, they clearly have their work cut out, given what's just happening as we're having this interview with hackers getting into the system of the colonial company that controls about a half of the oil coming from Texas up to New Jersey. And it's clear that we have a lot to do to improve our defenses against hackers, whether they're for ransomware or for cyber war. What exactly the US government is going to do, I don't know, but they've been talking about this for years and it keeps happening. So I'm rather concerned about whether we do have any effective defense against hackers, be they governments or criminals.
Okay. Also, has the Biden administration decided to, you answer the thing about relocated the troops, but what about paying the Biden administration paying attention to the Indian and Pacific Ocean? What are the implications for the stability of the region?
Well, I don't think they're thinking in terms of the Indian Ocean. They're either thinking in terms of the Gulf or the North Arabian Sea. I mean, just outside the Gulf. Or they're thinking about the Pacific and the confrontation there with the Chinese. But I don't think there's much thinking about the Indian Ocean as an area that we have to worry about per se.
All right, talking on Gaza, Norman Rule, he's a former chief of station in CIA, and he served in the CIA for 34 years. He said Nothing justifies the ongoing rocket attacks versus Israel. Hamas knows its attacks invite IDF response versus launch sites, rockets, factories, and Hamas command control, many of which are located in civilian areas. We should not ignore that Tehran's support to Hamas enabled this violence. What do you think about this opinion?
Well, I mean, Hamas, Hamas and the Palestinians are responding as they can with what they have. And, sadly, the only way the Palestinians seem to be able to get attention is by firing off rockets on civilian targets in Israel. And it's having an impact. And this time it is particularly interesting because Israeli Arabs have taken to the streets. And this is a whole new dimension to the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And, this is happening because Hamas is firing off these rockets. It has really riled the waters, the Palestinian-Israeli waters, and everybody's paying attention to it. Furthermore, Hamas has shown that it can close the international airport of Israel. We have never seen that before, at least since the Gulf War of 1991. I think they may have been closed for some time then, but it's been a long time, and not caused by the Palestinians. So this is something new and different, closing the airports. So the Hamas is getting more accurate and more long range in its missiles, and it's having an impact.
Do you believe that these attacks are being orchestrated by Iran to have the upper hand during the negotiation with US in Vienna?
No, I do not. I don't think it has anything to do with the negotiations. This is internal. This started with, the protests at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and this had nothing to do with the negotiations between Iran and the United States.
So why, if there is no relationship, why Congress orders Biden to cancel Iran talks as Tehran-backed terrorist attack Israel? More than 40 senators led by Marco Rubio say Biden's sanction relief for Iran will fuel more terrorism against Israel.
Well, there's a whole group of Republicans that don't want these negotiations to succeed and will seize upon anything to try and disrupt them. This is U.S. politics, and these are supporters of Trump who pulled out of the agreement, and they don't want to see this agreement revived or the Americans going back into it. And they will use any excuse they can to try and disrupt the negotiations.
Why there is an opinion that says Palestinians have instigated this cycle of violence, every cycle of violence. If Hamas put down its weapons tomorrow, there would be peace. If Israel put down its weapon, there would be genocide.
I don't, it's, is either going to happen? Is either Israel going to put down its weapons or Hamas put down its weapons, as long as there are no talks, no way out of this deadlock? I don't see anybody putting down their arms.
So do you think that there will be any talks regarding this matter? That's
a very interesting question. Everybody's talking about we need a ceasefire, but what happens after then? It's not a good time for talks. I mean, the Israelis don't have a government and the Palestinians don't have a government. Both are tied up in elections. It's probably the worst possible time to try to have elections. And so to me, ceasefire, yeah, let's have a ceasefire, but then what?
Mm.
What's going to happen? What I don't see Netanyahu undertaking talks with
Mm.
Mahmoud Abbas. Both are crippled by elections or not holding elections. So it's just a very bad time for any kind of substantive negotiations on the Palestinian issue.
You know, Sarah Carter, she's a Fox News TV anchor. She said the Biden administration effort to promote de-escalation between Israel and Hamas will now include sending Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs, Hadi Amr, to the region on Wednesday. Amr, however, has taken a stance against U.S. ally Israel on the conflict even before he stepped foot in the administration and before he is to land in Israel for his latest trip. So do you think that Hadi Amr will succeed, and is he the right person to be there during this conflict?
He's not a very high-level person. I don't think anybody knows him or has any particular high regard for him. And above all, I don't know what his brief is. I don't know what Biden has told him to try to do other than to get a ceasefire. So I don't hold a lot of hope out for his mission. I think this is going to have to play out between Hamas and the IDF, and until they get tired of, throwing missiles and bombs at each other. To what I don't know, and what we don't know yet, is whether this is really a flare-up or we're at the verge of a third intifada, which really goes on for some time. There's enormous frustration among the Palestinians. I don't know what their willingness to go on for days and days and days might be. But the Israelis cannot afford to keep the airport closed down in Tel Aviv for a week. So it's not clear to me, the Palestinians, the success in closing down the airport and provoking the Arab Israelis to take to the streets may encourage them to keep this thing going.
Is it for the benefit for Iran? Because Iran is backing Hamas. And do you think that Hamas is a terrorist organization?
Is it a terrorist organization? Well, that's what the U.S. government says it is. It's not a terrorist towards us. It's not carrying out terrorist operations against the U.S. government. So I don't see that for the United States, particularly, it's a terrorist organization. No.
So why they consider it as a terrorist organization?
Well, that's for political reasons in the administration. I mean, they do this for domestic reasons, but it's not a threat to the United States. Never has been.
It's not directly, but maybe to the allies of United States in the Middle East. No?
Well, the Israelis certainly consider it as a terrorist organization. But the Qataris don't consider it as a terrorist organization. I mean, there are different views. It depends what your politics are, and it's not. But I think for the United States, it's not a terrorist organization. It's not a threat to the United States.
Yeah, but it's a proxy of Iran.
No, I don't think it's a proxy of Iran. It's independent organization that looks for aid where it can get it, and it gets some of it from Iran. It's kind of like the Houthis in Yemen.
Yeah, it's the same. And Hezbollah in Lebanon.
The Houthis weren't provoked to go to war in 2015 and try and seize control of the whole country. I don't think the Iranians put them up to it, but they've gotten a lot of support from Iran and a lot of missiles and and expertise. And so the Iranians seized the occasion.
Don't you think that Hezbollah and Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq and Hamas and al-Houthis are a real threat for the American allies in the Middle East?
Well, it depends. In Iraq, yes, they are a threat to the remaining American troops there. Yes. Hezbollah, I don't see it quite as the same threat on the ground that the Hashd al-Shaabi is in Iraq. Clearly a threat to the Americans there. So it's different, it's different situations in different countries.
All right, let's go on to a tweet made by Ilhan Omar. She said, no mention of Sheikh Jarrah, no mention of the Al-Aqsa raid, no mention of the 13 innocent children killed in airstrikes, no mention of the ongoing occupation of millions in an open-air prison. You aren't prioritizing human rights. She's talking about the American support of Israel. You're siding with an oppressive occupation. Do you agree with her?
It's too one-sided. It's it's both sides are suffering now. The Hamas is not zeroing in on specific, and they're trying to, but their rockets are falling on civilian targets the same way Israeli planes are bombing civilian buildings. It's been quite striking, some of those strikes on those high rises in Gaza City. But Hamas is throwing these, just shooting off these rockets, and they land where they land, and they're not that precise. So there's 6 Israelis have been killed, which is small compared to the 80 some plus Palestinians that have been killed. But if opening fire on civilian targets is abuse of human rights and whatever you want to call it, then both sides are involved in this transgression.
I thank you so much, Mr. David Otaway, for being with us. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Maria.
Thank you.